Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Terria by Devin Townsend.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So of course, me being myself, I have the inclination to call this album Terraria, but it isn't, they just sound similar. It's of course an unrelated anecdote because it doesn't have to do anything with the video. Well, just enjoy my favorite bits from this album. So Devin Townsend was already a pretty acclaimed name when he started his solo career in 1997. He was well known by many to be the mad scientist of progressive metal. And today we're going to be listening to his fourth album, which is one of the many solo albums he released along the years, and the three albums that came before this one had a pretty mixed reviews when it came to Devin Townsend's fans. But if there's one point which not many argue about is the fact that this album that we're reviewing today, called Terria, is probably the peak performance by Devin Townsend. And I think that the best way to describe this album as a whole is a description I've been seeing thrown around many times, and I just think that it really works for this one, and this is of course that the music on here feels like a wall of sound. And what I mean by that is that there really are no empty spaces within each track. There's just a lot of things going on and using a lot of layers to get that certain effect. So you have a lot of synth layers and guitar layers and keyboard layers and percussion, and all of those are multiplied many times to create what is only to be the background of the music, because it even doesn't cover the main event that's taking place with the instruments like guitars, bass, drums, and whatever. And the absurd level of complexity that this wall of sound has is a point of love and hate towards this album by many, with some really liking how this overall thing sounds while others finding it quite obnoxious and overwhelming. And personally, I kind of really like it. I like the fact that there's so many moving elements in each and every song. I like closing my eyes and trying to decipher what I'm listening to and getting to the nitty gritty bits and actually seeing whatever tiny ingredients make this song to be what it is. And all that I told you so far is just a surface level description of what's to be found on here, because you wait until you hear what this album is actually about. Well, this extreme progressive experimental metal album is actually about the earth and nature. Yes, I know, I find this to be quite brilliant. No more is anyone growling about unearthly beings and various types of gore, but instead about stuff like Earth Day, wildlife, and recycling. And the brilliancy of it all came to me, I think, especially in the song Earth Day, when I heard Devin actually screeching at the top of his lungs, "Recycle, recycle," and I thought to myself, you know what, we just have to create a petition and make it so that this song will be the de facto song that is used to teach kids in kindergartens and elementary schools how to properly recycle. But honestly, as much as I like the music on here, I do find that there's a bit of a flaw in it, and that's the fact that it's not actually that concise, and this inconsistency with the album is what leads it later on down the road to be much more versatile than what it began with. And what I mean by that is that this album begins with a number of banger tracks which all have to do something about the environment, the earth, the wildlife, whatever, but then as we go along it kind of just strays from that idea and goes into different places which don't really feel like a part of this album. And I think that this really brings me to my main point of criticism and suggestion about this album. I think that this album could have and probably should have been a concept album, because as it stands right now, this album is an idealistic one. It has an idea behind it, but it doesn't follow through with the entirety as in the form of a concept. And what I mean by that is that this album should at least have told some sort of story through narration or through linear progression and stuff like that, so the message would be more and well understood. Because I do believe that Devin Townsend didn't make this one in order to just garner up money, but instead because it actually means something to him being a Canadian and him being very probably in tune with nature. He probably made this album because he wanted to make some sort of change, and I can definitely see that happening better in the form of a concept album. And it's not like this one doesn't have any concept qualities to it. It already has the pretty seamless transitions from one song to the other, basically making a lot of this album as one entire piece, as well as having some unconventional ways of telling a story which is used through recordings, which I personally really liked, and it kind of reminded me of Roger Waters' work. And the cherry on top is probably that the fact that if this album was made as a concept album, it would have greatly affected the listenability of it all from start to end. And what I mean by that is that this album, well, it is a lot to take in. The wall of sound and everything that's going on in this album and the subject material are all very heavy, and they just fall on you and you don't really know how to expect them. And especially for someone who is not a huge fan of metal music and this is their first time listening to this album, I can admit that this was quite a lot for one sitting to go through. And I think that if this one felt like one cohesive story that I just, started and ended at the end of the album, I would have sat through the entirety of it without actually bothering myself to feel like I have to stop it in the middle, which is actually what I did with this album. It was too overwhelming for me, so I just kind of stopped it at the 50-minute mark and came back to it the morning later to finish it off, and boy, I'm happy that I did, because at that point I really didn't have any guts to experience any more of the music. And when it comes down to the individual tracks, there are some that I liked more and some that I liked less, which is of course something that is relevant to every album that I review on here, but I wouldn't really be able to pinpoint any given point. I can just tell you that this album felt like one entire experience instead of multiple little tracks, and that's the way I prefer remembering it. And all in all, I will have to say that this album definitely sticks out in the realm of metal music, at least the ones I've heard so far. It is different, it is exciting, it uses some very unconventional ways of playing and making its own music, and I really liked what it does. And despite me not knowing this for a fact, I think that the reason this album feels so unique and so versatile is because Devin Townsend himself is very much a unique and versatile person that, despite knowing how to generate really good metal music, can also make a lot of other different ideas within his musical abilities, and thus he incorporates all of them into this one album. Because in this one there could have been a given moment where there would be, the normal gent metal, which is very prominent nowadays, but at the same time, without exception, you could have found like a folk song on here with leading guitars, which also sounded equally amazing. But unfortunately, I find that this album is pretty underrated and not a lot of people even know to begin with, so hopefully this review will shed some more light on it. So, to be quite frank, this cover is not one that I particularly like that much. Yes, of course I get the idea of the polluted and dying earth as compared to what it could have been, but honestly, I don't think this cover is very well made, and in its center of it all, it doesn't really make me feel anything. And when it comes down to a touchy subject like this, which is of course our home, our planet, our future, it really feels like it has to have something that is more than what's seen on here. Again, I'm pretty much sure that Devin Townsend actually has something towards the environment and nature, and that's why I made this album, so I really do feel that a cover should advocate for it in a better way, and this is really not the way because it doesn't do anything for the album. It is pretty basic, and I think there's many, like thousands of ways that you could have approached this one in a better fashion. I personally would have gone for something smaller that would symbolize the main point that this album tries to make, which is of course, you know, caring for the environment and thus for ourselves, and I think that this could have been better. Of course, I am none the wiser of how to actually make a better cover for this, but this one is just pretty much lazy and not that memorable as well. Like, let's talk about that. This cover isn't one that I'm gonna remember for a while now. It doesn't have anything that interesting in it. All in all, this is pretty much a bad cover, which I am probably going to forget by the time tomorrow's episode airs. So yeah, like all albums, this one has its ups and downs, but I do feel like it gets a very strong 7 out of 10 because there's a lot of things found on here, and definitely most of them are pretty good. Again, I am not a big fan of metal music, but when it comes down to it and some objectivity put into it, this album is pretty damn good. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to The Suffering Joy by Magic Pie. I of course want to thank my lovely supporter over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wallum, you are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.